All right, we do want to welcome back friend of the show. He's back. Josh Pate. Welcome back to the show, man.
Yeah, this is, I think, some of my best studio work that you're listening to right now. It's just music that, like any artist, it just came to me. And by coming to me, I mean, I Googled royalty-free music and downloaded it. And that's how that song came to me. So I appreciate you appreciating my work.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, we actually had a friend that worked for my dad. His name's Nick McClure, but he made us some podcast music recently. And it's pretty cool. I'll have to let you listen to it later. But
you have to give me his number later is what you'll have to do. Because
hey,
royalty-free is getting old.
I really will. We can make it happen. He's super talented. So, well, Josh, this started with, we had you on the show back during the season. Seems like so long ago, but I DM'd you a question to answer on your show. And you said, hey, let's set something up and we'll get it recorded on air. So it is about the playoff system, right? So I'll start with this. Daniel and I have both been 4-team playoff forever. Keep it at 4 teams. It's perfect the way it is. And for some really good reasons. That is best regular season of any sport, right? Every game matters. In most years, this is what I point out to most people is there's not 4 teams that deserve to play for a championship. Most years it is 2, and occasionally it's been 3. 2019 was one year where you could argue like, hey, you had 3 undefeated Big Ten, ACC, SEC champ at the end of the season. So first, I'll throw it to you, Josh. Do you see any problems with the current playoff system?
I see plenty of problems with the way that the current playoff is covered, and that's maybe a different discussion we can have. As for the format, no, I don't. And anytime, you could probably go down the list right now because we all know him, we all listen to him. Anytime someone goes to the usual quiver of, well, let me pull out this arrow against the playoff, that arrow against the playoff. They're like styrofoam arrows. They're so easy to knock down if you can properly articulate the right points. I don't care about how many undefeated teams there are, to be blatantly honest with you. I don't care because there's so much inequity in college football scheduling that when I have someone tell me going undefeated is the hardest thing to do in college football and you should be rewarded for it, it's ignorance. It's not true. If that were true, then you'd be on board with me seceding. Like if I'm Texas A&M this year, let me just leave the SEC. Let me go play 12 FCS teams. Let me go just dial them up because if I go undefeated, you're telling me regardless of, arbitrary things like strength of schedule, hey, if I go undefeated, I'm in. You're giving me no motivation, first off, to challenge myself. That's why the conference is not going to 9 conference games anytime soon. And secondly, you're telling me that you're applying a Sunday mentality to Saturday. On Sundays in pro ball, you are what your record says you are. You absolutely are. But see, in Sunday ball, the best team's favored by probably 2 touchdowns over the worst team. Alabama would be favored by 65 points over Kent State if you put an honest-to-God point spread on the game. So I don't really care about someone's record.
Daniel, what problems do you have with the playoff?
Well, okay, so it's weird because I feel like I'm almost devil's advocate from our natural thought, but we've kind of come around recently. One of my biggest concerns, because I love college football so much, and when you just said Saturday versus Sunday, it immediately drew out an emotion in me because I'm very much a Saturday guy rather than a Sunday guy. But that kind of leads me into like, what do you think about the health of the sport? Do you feel like, and I know that you've mentioned stuff before, just kind of jump on it, but do you feel like the health of the sport is, that it's very healthy in a certain region versus other regions? And do you think that college football stands the chance of potentially losing interest? Specifically, I'll just go ahead and call it out, the Pac-12. I mean, especially with how the past year has gone, the Pac-12 is very much going to be in trouble money-wise and all these other things. I'm not saying throw them a bone. I'm just thinking maybe fan interest, maybe drum up support if they're able to have an automatic qualifier with, let's say, an 18 playoff.
I worry about it every day. It's in my best interest for there to be coast-to-coast interest in this sport. But I think that sometimes causation and correlation do not match up here. A lot of folks, I think, want to conveniently make this argument thinking you're not, smart enough to think on multiple planes at the same time. Listen, USC ran this sport for a period of time back in the early 2000s. The population density has only gotten greater on the West Coast. There are more high school talents on the West Coast now. So everything should have progressed to where it's even more likely for that to happen. But when you have, whether it be at a program level or a conference level, when you make poor decisions and you can't keep your own house in order, it is not the job of college football at large to restructure itself to hopefully subsidize you and bail you out. That's not the way real life is supposed to work. It's not the way college football is supposed to work. And so hopefully what you see, I'll tell you what to do a better job at maintaining interest on the West Coast more than any conference commission or a TV deal. Just play better football. You're capable of doing it at Oregon. You're capable of doing it at Southern Cal. But let me tell you, you're capable of doing it at UCLA, Stanford, and Arizona State too. So you got to get a viable product, or else all this other stuff is just putting lipstick on a pig. It's meaningless.
So let me give you a couple of problems that I have with the current playoff structure. And I'd love to hear your rebuttal. All right. So number one, the committee. So my first solution to, in my mind, fix the playoff would be, let's have a 14 playoff. Let's replace the committee with the BCS system, because number one, the BCS would have come up with the same 4 teams every year so far of the playoff. So I think they've gotten the 4 right. But outside of that, number one, I agree with you. The way it's covered, the rankings, like the show, the Tuesday night reveal on ESPN, it's a lot of nothing, right? But the committee does stuff all the time with teams, moving them up and down randomly with no rhyme or reason. And I think that they hurt themselves this year with releasing that picture of them watching the games as if they were hostages in a hotel room in Dallas. Like, that looked like the most miserable football watching of all time. And the fact that they're also they're athletic directors. They're people who, why are you qualified to make a judgment on how good this football team is over people like you in the industry who, like, you live, breathe, talk college football 24/7. And so my biggest problem, that's right. So my biggest problem with the current playoff structure is the committee, right? Secondly, I think it's the gray area. There is no, if you do A, B, and C, you make the playoff, right? It is purely subjective to a committee. And I also don't like the fact that a group of 5 team, I'm not saying they should make the playoff, but they will never make the 14 playoff. They will never do it. And so I actually like your idea of a separate group of 5 playoff. So those are my current problems with it. Curious to hear your thoughts.
All right. Well, first off, let's go in order. So the committee, that is, in terms of principle, a valid beef someone could have. Because I can understand how someone would look at any given year, the group of folks that you have on that committee, and you'd say, why would I value their opinion on the best teams in college football any more than mine or Uncle Joey's or Fred, who I talk to at the water cooler on Tuesdays and Thursdays and at work? Like, why would I value their opinion anymore? I get that. So if you want a more metric-based or data and analytics-based objective list of criteria for what it takes to make the playoff, that's well and good in theory. Here's the problem, and the reason why I don't think it's structured that way. The reason is because it's easy to do that when you have equity in the sport and when you have an overall parity-driven model like the NFL. The NFL feels very comfortable saying any given year, if you win your division, let's call it a conference for college football's purposes, if you win that, you're going to be guaranteed a playoff spot. They feel comfortable doing that because any given year, there's so much equality and equity in the sport that, I mean, we're really not going to have a disaster on our hands, but you could have that in college. And so when you start talking about that list of objective criteria, what would it really look like? I mean, if you're a conference champ, would you have to be at least in the top 8 of our imaginary rankings in order to qualify? So I'm all for the subjectivity and the human element being incorporated in lieu of boxing yourself in unnecessarily to a bunch of these hard and fast, cemented in place objective measures that could end up putting a pretty egregiously wrong team in the playoff. The second thing or third thing you talked about was the G5 deal, and I don't even waste a lot of time arguing about it. You're not talking about the same sports being played. Technically, the same sports being played. You're not talking about the same sport being played. I mean, I'm watching, we're doing a signing day show next Wednesday. We will talk about the University of Alabama signing 25 kids that are more highly rated than the best signee that Memphis or Central Florida will have. That's just fact. These teams are not competing in the same galaxy. And so instead of trying to shoehorn your way into a structure where we can have one and the other in the same format, just call it what it is and create a separate playoff. And that's about as deep as I ever go on the G5 thing. I don't even waste a lot of time arguing about it, to be honest.
Well, I agree with that. I think that really when you look at it, like the FCS, I just draw because the FCS is the closest example to the group of five outside of, Power Five. I mean, they're right in between it. So the FCS, I think they're able to still play, group of five and Power Five schools while also having their own trophy that they compete for with their peers. So I think that that's kind of what you're getting at is about is they're not playing the same sport. Well, their peers are who they should be competing with for a championship. They shouldn't be competing with, they're up in weight class. It doesn't make any sense for them to play, the same game as Alabama to try to get that same trophy because, like Jacob alluded to earlier, they're never going to be in that top four. And without an automatic qualifier, I would argue most years they're not going to be in that top 8. This year, you probably would have had something with Cincinnati. This was the year for that. But most years, you probably wouldn't have a group of 5 even scratching the surface if you're being true to who the best 8 teams are. So I'd like to see that happen. I think it'd be something for all these players to have to strive for. So I'm with you on that one.
My beef, and always has been, with the inclusion of any concept of an auto bid for a G5 team has rarely been about quality of team. And the extreme measure that I'll go to illustrate this example and to prove my point is if I were to take the Kansas City Chiefs and I were to drop them in the AAC and have them play Cincinnati's schedule, I'd know they're the best college football team by 50 miles. I would not suggest that they qualify for the playoff because I will not have thought they earned their way. There's this minimum baseline of challenge that you have to face, to me, in order to qualify. When you've got teams that are playing a schedule that disproportionately tougher than yours, again, you're not competing in the same galaxy. And so I don't care if it's the Chiefs or the Bucks, man. If you're not playing enough quality opponents, you don't even come into the room to be able to have the conversation. That's my whole point with it. So it always sounds disrespectful, like you don't think Cincinnati could compete with so-and-so any given day. No, quite the opposite. I think they could. But see, here's the problem. I watched them play Georgia in the Peach Bowl. It was a very good game. They were very competitive. I think, if anything, they validated themselves even in a loss. That's not the point. The point is never could they compete. The point is,
do they deserve
pack your bags and go play Texas A&M
Yeah.
a week later, and then come home and play Carolina before you go on the road to Auburn and then again to Alabama. Go through all of that and come out undefeated. Then we can talk. But you can't gear up for one big game a year where there's disproportionate motivation. And if you win it, say, here's our evidence. That's not evidence to me.
So Daniel mentioned it. So I've been team 14 playoff. Keep the 14 playoff forever. It's exclusive. It validates the regular season. College football has the best regular season of any sport. And the first time I entertained the 18 playoff was actually listening to Barton and Bud. And it was what Daniel mentioned. Bud Elliott has mentioned the health of the sport. But I hear your point about, the Washingtons, the Oregons, the USCs. They just got to get better if they want the sport to be healthy out there.
Well, you know what else? You know what else we can talk about? Not to interrupt, even though I did, so I guess it was to interrupt. I think it's a lot. I still think it's a lot of reverse engineering. I think you're trying to give a B solution for an A problem. And I'm telling you right now, if you were to ask someone who is 17 years old, what is the nucleus of college football? Like, what is the core of it? They're going to tell you the college football playoff because they've grown up in the college football playoff era. And unfortunately, the machine behind the college football playoff, the owners of the playoff, are also the premier platform for college football in this country today, and that's ESPN. When money that big entered the equation, the billions of dollars worth of contract that they purchased with the college football playoff, when that entered the equation, and the biggest college football giant in our industry was the purchaser of that contract, it made financial sense for them. And it also meant that they were going to promote the property that they owned, which they have full rights to do, with all of their marketing machines. But here's the downside. The downside is it created this environment where everyone's got to go through ESPN. I don't even care if it appeals to you, if you like the network. If you're going to be a college football fan in America, you're watching ESPN. You have to. That's where a lot of the games are. And so by the very default of what you have to do as a college football fan, you're going to be exposed to their coverage. And again, I'm not I'm not telling you it's anything I wouldn't do. I'm just telling you, when you shell out that kind of money, you're absolutely going to market that product year round because you want to get the most bang for your buck and return on your value. And so what's happened is it's fostered this environment where the core of college football and the nucleus of the college football world in the subconscious mind of the fan has now become not the regular season, it's the playoff. In August, you're watching marketing surrounding the playoff. In the middle of your Oregon State versus Utah game, they're talking about the playoff. And all of a sudden, you've got people also telling you if you're not in the playoff, since that's the core of the sport and everything else revolves around it, that you're playing what apparently are now called meaningless games. Well, if you're told that over and over again, you start to think the Cotton Bowl is a meaningless game if it's not in the playoff rotation that given year. And so everyone looks at the situation we have now, and they're mad that we have opt-outs, and they're mad that games are meaningless if they're not playoff games. And they think the problem just started now. This is chapter 17 of the book of problems. This is not chapter 1. You can't start on chapter 17 and understand the story. You got to go back to chapter 1. Chapter 1 was the day that playoff contract got signed by the premier college football brand in America. You were about to change the definition of what the nucleus of college football is in America. And that's the state of the sport right now. That, to me, changing that would do more for this sport than changing any playoff structure or changing any compensation package or name, image, likeness. I know that's at the forefront of the conversation right now. Changing the conversation, changing the nature of the conversation and where the focus is, that is the biggest key to me to the health overall of this sport.
And I think that's the money is why I've accepted that whether I like it or not, we're going to go to 8 teams because at some point, someone, ESPN's going to say, we'll put up X amount of dollars to sign a new playoff contract. We can get more playoff games and make more money. I just think, what's the contract through 2026? Yeah. The current playoff contract. If it goes through, then I think I'd be shocked if it makes it through 2026 with it being 4 teams still. I just think there's too much money on the table where, again, they could guarantee, whether they deserve it or not, that a Pac-12 team can get in and they can have more money from the Los Angeles market, from the Eugene market, from the Seattle market. And I just think it's coming, whether we like it or not. And so I've tried to settle with that and come up with how I think it should look. But bottom line, it's the same system everyone has. Every Power 5 champ's going to get in. You're going to have 2 at large. You're going to have a group of 5. But once again, get rid of the committee. Just give me a BCS system and let them decide, the cold hard computers.
Or just let our extra point rankings take the place of the BCS because they're
right.
They're better than them anyways. So
you will have to pry this 4-team playoff out of my cold, dead fingers. That's what you'll have to do. That's my lasting message to the people out there.
Josh Pate, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, that's it. Okay, fun time as always, guys. Thank you.